to our live stream. We are so thankful you're here today. Um, we have a very important topic we want to talk about today as we honor the 20th anniversary of September 11th, 2001. I am honored and thrilled to have my colleague and friend, David Kessler, here with us. David, welcome.
Thank you, Kate. Nice to be with you.
Yes, nice to be with you as well, as always. As we come up on this anniversary, I think it brings up a lot of different feelings and thoughts and memories for so many people. And your experience with September 11th, 20 years ago was rather unique in the way that you were able to honor the victims and honor the living. Tell us a little bit about your experience that day.
Yes, I think most of us, just like it's one of those events, we can recall where we were, what we were doing when we found out. I can remember getting calls, turn on your TV, and seeing what was going on and just being horrified.
Yeah.
Calling friends, family, my kids, making sure everyone's okay. And not soon after, I was activated by the Red Cross and we were sent to LAX. One of the planes was bound for Los Angeles. And we were just trying to figure out what this means, what we're doing, how we're helping. And I can remember one of the first things that I knew this was different is when I got there, they also brought in folks to give us a quick orientation on spotting bombs. And I remember going, wait, this is out of my scope of, I don't know how to spot bombs, but it was suddenly, oh, we're in a new world here. We're in a new world.
Yeah.
And so I spent those first few days at the airport. There were so many people who were trying to figure out what was going on, not to mention the devastation that was happening. And it wasn't long after that I actually heard that one of my close and dear friends, Barry Berenson Perkins, was on one of the flights. And all of a sudden, it got very personal to understand, in each of those flights, each of those people, oh, there's a picture of sweet Barry.
I love
to understand, all those lives that were in peril and were lost that day. And so I think it's been so personal for us in so many ways.
Yes.
To have that experience of seeing for the first time on our land that we were vulnerable, that this can happen to us. So I'm not surprised these days that it's bringing up a lot of emotions for people. At the same time, we're seeing on the news everything with Afghanistan. It's a heavy time in our world. And just after, I think it was, I was at the airport and we were seeing people and helping people cope with what was going on. And then once flights were resuming, the pilots, the flight attendants, they didn't want to fly again. They were too afraid.
Yes.
When psychologically, I don't think we get what that was like for them. I remember working with so many pilots who shared with me they had gone into simulators to understand what that might have been like. Now, to all of us, that might sound weird, but the reality is we all sort of go, oh my gosh, what if we had been on that plane? What if we had been working in one of those buildings? What if we had been in the Pentagon? Those feelings come up. We just don't have access to a simulator, a flight simulator the way they did. So we're dealing with so many issues.
Yeah.
And go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say,
I can just go on and on about it. You can see, it was.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that about the simulators, because at first it's a little jarring, like, why would you want to do that? But at the same time, as you well know, I mean, there's this natural curiosity of of what would that have been like? What did my colleagues go through? How would I have maybe handled it? I mean, there's just so many unanswered questions within grief, as you know, and and I'd like to think that in some ways that was part of their healing, was to have more information and to understand a little more.
Right. And that was a very skewed subset of people,
Sure.
who were sharing with me. I don't think that's, it's hard. We always, have to remind people in grief and trauma, everything's a general topic. None of us grieve the same. None of
Right.
us go through
Right.
trauma the same way. And
Yeah.
eventually I got to ground zero, and there is a Marriott hotel. And I remember standing on a street at a Marriott hotel that I had known. And you turn this corner, and it was like walking onto another planet. I had
Wow.
never seen anything like that. Everything went from being sort of in living color to
Mhm.
just gray.
Mhm.
And it's hard to picture the enormity of it. It was,
Right.
I don't know, 8, 9 stories high. The smell was awful. The smoke was in the air. You were just so aware that that smoke also had human remains in it. It was a devastating place to visit and see.
Right. Right.
So I think we actually might have a picture of what that was like at that
We
time.
we do,
Yeah.
yes. Tell us
And,
about this.
yeah, it's interesting if you look at that picture and you want to get the enormity of it, to really look at those first responders at the bottom, to see how small they are compared to how big it is. And then if you just look on the top, any place where there's a little color, you will see that's a first responder.
Oh,
So
wow.
I think we don't get what this was like. It looked like being on another planet. And I'll tell you, when I visited Kate, at one point they had, of course, because I'm grief and loss, they had me in the morgue there. And I remember, and this was like a couple of weeks in, I believe. At one point, I believe it was the bell that rang, and everything went still. All the digging, all the rescue, everything went so still, because it means they had found someone. And then everyone stood in silence. It was remarkable because it was this
Oh, wow.
huge, huge place. Everyone got so silent. And I remember standing there feeling like, oh my gosh, they're bringing a body. And here was a body coming. And
Right.
all of a sudden, it was a finger. And I realized it like was the enormity of the respect for a human finger.
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
still with me, obviously.
Yes.
And I think, that's part of it is I want to keep it with me.
Right.
I think I don't want to get over it. I have learned to live
Mhm.
with it. And I think that's so true about what we go through in the experience of grief. We don't move on, we don't get over, we don't forget. We
Right.
learn to live with it.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences in that story. That's beautiful and moving, and I love the idea of not getting over, not forgetting, not, and carrying it with you. So when as a grief expert, when you think about this 20-year anniversary and the, hundreds of thousands of people who were affected, millions of people were affected by this event, there's no question. What are some of the ways you feel like we can honor this anniversary, whether we were directly or indirectly impacted by this? What are your thoughts on it when you reflect on the 20 years?
Well, it's interesting. So many people weren't born when this happened now.
Yes.
And I think the same way we might have heard our parents talk about things like Pearl Harbor that we didn't really have a personal feel for.
Correct.
I think the more we can share about this and talk about this and make it personal. I mean, I'm a big believer that, as long as we remember and talk about these events, the people can't fully die. I will always talk about my friend Barry.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of our work, is to continue to find meaning by talking about them and sharing these stories of how it impacted us, and
Yeah.
to put what's happening today in context, especially for young people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, you know, where things are today, you mentioned, a lot of the news coverage and the situation that's going on in Afghanistan now. And then if you bring it back home, I mean, still global, but the pandemic and the aftermath of that. I know we were chatting earlier about kind of the ongoing grief, the longevity of this pandemic and the things that it has taken from us in so many ways: people, norms, routines, celebrations, mourning, all of these things. What has your experience been over the last 18 months or so working with people and witnessing this?
Well, this has been so different. When I think about many events that we're dealing with, whether it's something like 9/11 or hurricanes, they have a very finite time.
Yes.
With this pandemic, we were very much like, okay, we're going to close for a month, then it's going back to normal. It's like we were in Kubler-Ross's bargaining. All right,
Yes.
if we just wash our groceries, everything will be fine. Oh,
Yes.
there's a vaccine, everything will be good, right? And
Yes.
I think what we're dealing with is this ongoing, prolonged grief and uncertainty.
Mhm.
And we do so much better when we know there is an ending.
Yes.
And we don't know what this ending is going to look like. And I think it's helpful to remind ourselves there will be a peace with this we find. I think the hard part is we don't know what that looks like,
Mhm.
but we will learn to cope with it and adjust to it. But you and I talked literally when I was doing a book tour for PESI when the
Yes.
shutdown happened, and we were on the phone like day 3
Yes.
talking about, this is going to change us forever.
Yes.
The
Yes.
world we knew is gone forever.
And I remember you saying that, and I was sitting in my office at PESI and I was thinking, gosh, and I don't think the enormity had really hit me yet. I'm in the Midwest and you are in LA, and the situation was very different in LA than it had been in the Midwest just yet, or at least in my area. And I remember thinking at that time, like, I admire and respect David, and I think he's totally right, but I just can't wrap my head around it yet. And then, a few weeks later, I was like, gosh, he was absolutely right. This changes. There's a pre and a post, very similar to 9/11, where, for people who maybe weren't in adulthood or weren't even born yet, I mean, you used to be able to like walk people to a gate, right, to see them off for their flight. And post 9/11, that's not the case anymore. And I remember you saying that with the pandemic, that there's going to be a lot of things that we just don't have and we just don't do anymore. But I love what you said a few minutes ago about, we are going to find some peace with this. We are going to find, a resolution is maybe too strong of a word, but peace. I love that concept.
Right. And there is no night that doesn't give way to a dawn. It's just,
Right.
we're
Right.
we're ready for it next week.
Yes.
And we don't have that certainty that we would like. And
Yes.
the other thing I think that has been so different is, we often talk about grief as not just death, but
Yes.
we kind of gave lip service to that. And I think with the pandemic, we've really learned that there are so many different kinds of grief. There's
Yeah.
grief for the world that has gone forever that we knew 2 years ago.
Mhm.
There's grief for, can we hug safely? Are our jobs secure? So many, events changing. I have a loved one who's, are we going to be able to have a wedding in November? It's just such a different world. And there's all these layers of grief that often go unacknowledged.
Absolutely. We know that so many of our viewers here today are mental health professionals or healthcare professionals, helpers, for lack of a better word. What would you recommend for people who are supporting others in grief and managing their own grief, especially in the wave of such uncertainty?
Well, I think it's so important we take care of ourselves. I mean, one of the things I think it's been up on the screen, a little video about self-care, because our self-care is so important. And we have to really understand that this is, we're dealing with this for the long haul, and we can only give so much each day, and we have to take time to take care of ourselves, and we have to find balance. We have to force ourselves to do a little exercise. We have to force ourselves to do, a little bit of better eating. And it's so strange to say this, but to find balance, you also have to find some moments of play. Our brain needs that. I play board games. I take walks. You have, in the heaviness of this world, your mind needs a break. And the more we take care of ourselves, the more we show up for the people around us.
Absolutely. I noticed Matthew in the comments just said self-care is not selfish. And you're absolutely right. It's actually the polar opposite of being selfish.
Absolutely. And that's such a different paradigm that we have to get used to, that so many of us have been other oriented. And, we're great at taking care of people. And we often don't know how to sort of just turn that off for just a few minutes and focus inward. And it's the most important thing we can do for our clients.
Absolutely. And I think if one thing, if there are some silver linings here when it comes to self-care, I'm seeing more and more, and I'm sure you are as well, that, in the therapy world, you're trained on self-care, kind of. But usually, if you're lucky, you have a supervisor who encourages it and encourages that balance. It's not always the case. I know it's the same way in healthcare. I think we could speak to healthcare workers right now, too.
Right.
Self-care doesn't always mean pedicures and spa days
Right.
and
That's what I was like when I did that video. I was like, I want more than just someone telling me to take a bubble bath. I
yes,
need
yes,
more techniques,
yes, absolutely. And I can speak for myself that I'm finding that my self-care is setting better boundaries, being able to say no, or can this wait, or something, just to kind of preserve my own well-being in that moment. And I love that idea of going beyond, bubble baths, as you
And
said.
I
Yeah.
often say no is a complete sentence.
Correct.
It's
Yes.
really okay to say no, no, thank you. And I think if you're in these professions, if you're a physician, a nurse, a social worker, a psychologist, oh my gosh, so many of us have been trained to care for others nonstop. And we are learning those good boundaries, and that sometimes there is a point you can't give anymore, and to honor that and go within. And it's hard. It's hard. We're not given a little on and off button.
Yeah, absolutely. We're kind of programmed that way, right? To be others focused first.
And the
Um,
other thing I want to mention that I think is so true, when I would teach about boundaries and self-care and compassion fatigue, I would say things like, use your drive home as your transition time, then go home and change your clothes, take a shower, take off your badge. All these transitions
yes.
have now been lost for so many people on Zoom. There's
Yes.
no healthy transition anymore to go from one client to the next client, to suddenly you're with your kids, to suddenly you're with your spouse, you're with your partner, and all this is happening at once in the same place.
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that our audience is absolutely resonating with you right now. That is, everyone is experiencing that right now. It's not having that
We
down.
didn't realize the importance of those transitions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe that is a silver lining, that we can learn to take care of ourselves a little bit better, so that we can be available for others in the way we want to.
And it's also this being such an ongoing experience. We talked about this earlier. Someone said to me, "Oh my gosh, I'm having so much post-traumatic stress." And I said, "Where's the post? Like, we're still in it. I haven't found the ending to this."
Yeah.
And it's important to know that all grief does not have trauma, but all trauma has grief.
Yes.
And we're all experiencing this on different levels. And we've seen so many increases in people who are having challenges with mental illnesses, mental health, so many people who, are having self-harming thoughts, so many people who have lost loved ones through death by suicide. There's a lot of other things that are happening in this pandemic that is no news to the people that PESI serves. I mean, the people on here are often in the epicenter of all this.
Right. Right. It's such an important topic. And I know we kind of started with 9/11 and we've transitioned to today. But as we approach this anniversary, I think it's really important that we do take the time to reflect on the enormity of that event, and honor our feelings about it. I wasn't directly or personally affected by that. I don't even know how to articulate my own experience, but I was affected, and I think it's important that we all honor that and be with that, even whether it's on Saturday or any other time. Anniversaries are always a good time to honor, but not necessarily the only time you can honor that.
And I even talk about the word bereaved comes from an old Latin word that means to be robbed. And I often think about anniversaries are a return to the scene of the crime. And this is literally, this anniversary is a return to the external scene of the crime, but also emotionally to where we were, to what has happened collectively. For people who didn't know anyone, we were all collectively affected by this. And so I think people might be surprised about the feelings that come up, the memories that come up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm remembering a good friend of mine was an air traffic controller in the Chicago area. And that evening he had called me and said his radar was completely blank, not a single plane in the sky. And he was so profoundly affected by that visual, and I just remember that as being one of the pieces of my memories of that day.
And and I think it's connecting us to what's going on today as we've talked about this. This is such a weird thing to admit, but I can remember being at the empty airport after 9/11, and an airport is profoundly different, empty, and unnerving. And as I was traveling for PESI 3-4 times a week. I was living at the airport.
Yes.
And when the pandemic hit, in that first week here in LA, when everything was closed after it was shut down, maybe the second or third week or something, I said, I just want to go out and take a drive somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up driving to the airport. And I pulled up right in front. Like there was you couldn't park on the curb.
Sure.
And I walked in and I saw the empty airport again. And I remember thinking back to all those feelings of 9/11.
Yeah.
And people said to me after, they said, why if you could drive anywhere, would you drive to the airport? Why didn't you go look at a mountaintop? And I said, well, a mountaintop is actually same in a pandemic.
Right.
Our airports are such a modern gathering place.
Mm-hmm.
They're such a place of our transition and our life and our connecting.
Right.
And I think people are going to find this weekend so many feelings about what's going on, connected to what's happened in the past 20 years ago. And I think we're going to have to it's a good idea to check in on one another a little more, to take a little extra care, to know if you work with people, you're going to maybe get a few more calls, and it will bring up stuff for people. And to
Right.
reassure them, that's part of the human condition.
Right.
I don't want to be someone who on Saturday doesn't feel anything.
Right. Right.
It's okay to have these feelings.
Yes. Yes. I think that's a lovely note to wrap up on. Thank you so much for being here, David. I know you're very busy. It's lovely to see you again.
Great.
I can see in the chat, I think you can too, that people are very appreciative of our talk today. And yes, good. We put that up so you can learn more about David's work. He is part of our PESI family. We love having him, and everybody out there, take care of yourselves and one another. Thank you so much.
And I'll just also, Kate, I just
Please.
want to give a little shout out to PESI, because I think people, see PESI as a CEU provider and this organization. And I think once you go to your events, whether they're online now or in person, you sort of realize, oh my goodness, there's amazing people there, like Mike and Kate and Linda and Claire and so many people that really every day keep all of us informed. And, I say you can tell a lot about an organization by how they handle grief. And as you know, when my younger son died, PESI was all over the situation. People like Linda and Claire drove to see me. So I just honor you're so much more than just a CEU organization. And I do feel like I'm part of your family. So thank you.
Thank you. That's lovely. Yes, thank you. And yeah, the feeling is mutual. We adore you, and we're so glad to have you. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.